There's a number that almost everyone carries silently, one they've never said out loud to another living person, not to a partner, not to a parent, not even to their closest friend. It's the exact amount of debt they owe. You'll see in this video why that number feels almost impossible to say out loud, even to the people who love us most. Not because we're bad with money, not because we've done something shameful, but because somewhere along the way, debt became the one number we all agreed, without ever discussing it, to keep hidden. Think about your own life for a moment. Do you know exactly what your partner owes right now? Today? Do you know what your closest friend is carrying? Does anyone in your family actually know your full number? For most people, the honest answer is no. And here's what's strange about that. We'll talk about almost anything else. Our fears, our health, even our relationships falling apart. Those conversations happen eventually, however uncomfortable. But debt stays sealed shut, carried alone, in silence, sometimes for years. Stay with me until the end, because understanding why we hide this number is the first step toward finally putting it down. To understand this silence, we need to look at where it actually comes from. Nobody is born ashamed of owing money. Watch a child and they'll ask anything, loudly, without hesitation. Why do we have less than them? Are we in trouble? That instinct gets trained out of us slowly by watching the adults around us. A parent's face tightening when a certain envelope arrives, a quick change of subject when a number almost slips out, a tense silence nobody explains. Children don't need to be told directly that debt is shameful. They absorb it the same way they absorb everything else that adults never quite say out loud. There's a cultural layer here too, worth naming clearly. Debt became tangled up with something deeper, self-worth. Owing money started to feel like proof of failure, evidence that you hadn't managed your life correctly, so silence became protection. If nobody knows what you owe, nobody can judge you for it. That protection made a certain kind of sense on the surface, but protection has a cost, and that cost gets paid quietly over years by people who never learned any other way to carry this. It's worth noticing that not all debt carries the same weight of shame. Some kinds feel almost impossible to admit, while others barely register at all. A mortgage feels almost respectable to mention. It's expected, understood, even seen as a sign of stability. But credit card debt carries a very different weight. It feels personal, careless, like evidence of a choice rather than a circumstance. Medical debt carries yet another kind of silence, often accumulated through no fault at all, and yet somehow still treated as something to hide, as if illness itself became something shameful simply because of the bill attached to it. And then there's the quietest kind of all, debt to family, money borrowed from a parent, a sibling, a close friend. That kind rarely gets discussed even between the two people directly involved, let alone anyone else. It sits in a strange unspoken space, technically known but never acknowledged out loud, shaping every future interaction without ever being named. This shame isn't distributed evenly across generations either. It's worth pausing on that because the shape of the silence has shifted even within the last few decades. For older generations, debt beyond a mortgage often carried an almost moral weight, something that reflected directly on character, on discipline, on whether you'd lived responsibly. Many people who came of age in that era still carry that framework internally even decades later, even when their circumstances were shaped far more by economic forces than by any personal failing. For younger generations, the picture is stranger in a different way. Student debt became so widespread that statistically it should carry almost no shame at all. Nearly everyone in certain age groups carries some version of it, and yet the silence persists anyway, almost out of habit, inherited from the generation before rather than earned through any logic of its own. Meanwhile, medical debt has grown into one of the most common types of debt in the country, often arriving through no choice or mismanagement whatsoever. And still, it gets folded into the same silence as debt that came from genuine overspending, as if the money owed matters more than the very different stories behind why it's owed. Think about how this shows up between two people who love each other. They share almost everything: their fears, their past, their private insecurities. But how many couples actually know each other's full financial picture before they combine their lives completely? How many carry private debt into a marriage, quietly hoping it either resolves itself or simply never comes up? Not because they're deceiving each other, because neither of them ever learned that this conversation was even supposed to happen. That's the real origin of this silence. Not one dramatic event. A quiet inheritance, passed down, reinforced everywhere we look. Think about how debt gets portrayed almost everywhere around us. In movies, it's rarely shown honestly. It's either invisible entirely or it's a moment of total collapse, dramatic and extreme. There's rarely a normal, calm depiction of an ordinary person simply owing money and working through it steadily. So we grow up seeing debt either hidden completely or treated as catastrophe, never simply discussed as something manageable. Social media made this heavier in its own quiet way. People see curated glimpses of everyone else's financial lives constantly: the vacations, the new car, the renovated kitchen, almost never the balance behind it. The minimum payment quietly due every month, the number nobody mentions in the caption. So the silence didn't disappear in the digital age, it just changed shape. Everyone performs financial ease in small, careful doses, while the real number stays exactly as hidden as it always was. The workplace adds its own layer to this, one rarely talked about directly. Many people carrying debt feel an added pressure to appear financially fine at work specifically, because compensation, promotions, even trust in high responsibility roles can feel tied, fairly or not, to an appearance of financial stability. So the silence doubles. Not only is the debt hidden from loved ones, it's hidden from colleagues too, adding another room in the house where the truth isn't allowed to enter. If you ask someone why they never talk about their debt, they'll usually say something like, "It's just personal." And that's true on the surface. But here's the mistake underneath that reasoning: treating silence as if it's harmless. Because it isn't. It's a decision made quietly over and over, and it carries real consequences. Consider what happens inside a relationship where debt is never fully disclosed. One partner might be quietly drowning, making minimum payments in secret, while the other assumes everything is simply fine because nobody has said otherwise. These gaps don't cause problems immediately. They sit there, unnoticed, sometimes for years, until a crisis forces the conversation that should have happened long before. The same pattern plays out between parents and adult children. Aging parents often carry debt entirely privately, not to deceive anyone, but because admitting it feels like admitting failure. Their children have no real picture, no idea what they might eventually need to help untangle, until a health crisis forces everyone to piece it together at the worst possible time, stressed, grieving, and completely unprepared. Here's the deeper mistake underneath all of this: believing that hiding debt protects the relationship, when usually the opposite is true. What actually damages trust isn't an honest number spoken out loud. It's the resentment and shock that build up in its absence. There's one more layer worth naming clearly. Silence doesn't just hide debt from other people, it often hides it from ourselves too. Someone who never speaks their number out loud never has to fully confront it either. It stays a vague, uncomfortable feeling, instead of an actual figure with an actual plan attached to it. Speaking it out loud makes it real enough to finally address. And that discomfort, the fear of making it real, is often the true reason the silence continues. There's a very specific kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying a hidden number for years. It's not the debt itself that wears a person down most, strangely enough. It's the constant low-level management of the secret. Avoiding certain topics at dinner. Changing the subject when a friend mentions a big purchase. Feeling a small flinch of anxiety every time a certain envelope arrives, even years after the original amount was borrowed. That vigilance is its own quiet cost, separate entirely from the interest accruing on the balance itself. People carrying this kind of silence often describe a background hum of stress that never fully goes away, one they've stopped even connecting back to its actual source, blaming it instead on general tiredness, general life pressure, anything except the one number they've never said out loud. There's also a generational thread worth following further, because this silence doesn't stay contained to the person carrying the debt. It quietly shapes what the next generation learns about money entirely, whether or not that's ever the intention. Children raised in households where debt was never mentioned, only sensed through tension and avoided envelopes, tend to absorb one lesson above all others: that money trouble is something to hide rather than something to solve together. They carry that lesson into their own adult lives, often without ever consciously choosing to, simply because it's the only model they were ever shown. This is how the silence outlives the original debt itself. The specific balance eventually gets paid off, or forgiven, or forgotten, but the pattern of hiding financial struggle gets passed down intact, ready to attach itself to whatever number comes next in the following generation. Breaking this cycle doesn't require perfect transparency with children. It simply requires letting them witness that money problems can be discussed calmly, worked through together, rather than only whispered about behind closed doors. A parent who says out loud and without panic, "We're working on paying something down right now, and here's roughly how we're thinking about it," teaches something entirely different than silence ever could, even if the child doesn't grasp every detail of what's being discussed. Let me tell you about two people. We'll call them Rachel and Tom. Both graduated around the same time, carrying nearly identical student loan balances. Both started their careers at similar salaries. On paper, their financial starting points were remarkably alike. Tom never talked about his debt with anyone, not with friends, not with family, barely even with himself in any concrete way. He made the minimum payments every month quietly and tried not to think about the total too often. When friends discussed money casually, he changed the subject or stayed silent. The number sat in the back of his mind constantly, a low hum of anxiety he'd learned to live around rather than address. Rachel started out just as uncomfortable with the topic. But a few months after graduating, something shifted. A close friend mentioned her own loan balance openly, almost casually, during a conversation about budgeting. Rachel remembers feeling a strange wave of relief just hearing someone else say a real number out loud, so she started doing the same, mentioning her balance to people she trusted, asking questions, comparing notes on repayment strategies. It felt awkward at first, even a little exposing, but something happened once she started speaking about it openly. She learned about repayment options she hadn't known existed. She learned that a coworker had successfully negotiated a lower interest rate simply by asking. She learned that carrying debt didn't make her uniquely behind. It made her exactly like almost everyone else her age, just finally willing to say so. 5 years later, the difference between Rachel and Tom wasn't really about who earned more or who was naturally better with money. Tom still carried roughly the same balance, adjusted for what he'd paid down, quietly, alone. Never having learned about options that might have accelerated his progress. He'd made a costly mistake early on, missing a refinancing window because he simply didn't know it existed. Nobody around him ever mentioned it, and he never asked, because asking would have meant admitting the debt out loud in the first place. He'd also, without quite realizing it, let the silence spread into other parts of his life. He avoided certain friendships that felt too financially comfortable. He turned down invitations he could technically afford, worried the conversation might drift somewhere he didn't want it to go. The debt itself stayed roughly the same size over those years, but the silence around it had quietly grown to touch far more of his life than the original number ever should have. Rachel, meanwhile, had paid her loans down significantly faster, not because she earned more, she didn't, but because speaking about her situation openly had connected her to information, strategies, and support that silence never could have provided. Something else had changed too, something harder to measure but just as real. The constant background hum of anxiety Tom still carried had mostly faded for her. Not because the debt disappeared instantly, but because she'd stopped spending energy managing the secret itself. The number became simply a fact to work with rather than something to fear being discovered. There's a third person worth mentioning here too, someone named David, whose story took a different shape entirely. David didn't stay silent by choice the way Tom did. He stayed silent out of fear, a very specific kind, rooted in a single bad experience early on. Years earlier, he'd mentioned his debt to a family member, hoping for understanding, and instead received judgment sharp enough that he never brought it up again with anyone. That single moment taught him a lesson that Rachel never had to learn the hard way, that opening up came with risk. What David's story adds to this isn't a contradiction of Rachel's experience. It's a reminder that breaking this silence isn't always simple or safe with every single person. The goal was never to tell everyone everything indiscriminately. It's to find at least one person, one relationship, where honesty is met with something other than judgment. And to start there, rather than assuming the first difficult reaction means honesty itself was the mistake. It's worth slowing down on that exact moment too, the moment right before someone finally says the number out loud for the first time. It rarely arrives dramatically. There's no perfect script running through their head, no confident rehearsed speech. Usually it's something much smaller, a conversation that was already happening, drifting close enough to the topic that staying silent would have taken more effort than simply speaking. For Rachel, that moment came in the middle of an ordinary conversation about budgeting, when her friend mentioned a number first, almost by accident. Rachel didn't plan her response. She simply matched the honesty being offered to her because it suddenly felt strange not to. That's often how it works. Silence doesn't usually break because someone finally works up dramatic courage. It breaks because someone else goes first, and it becomes easier to follow than to keep hiding. This is worth remembering if you're waiting for your own moment to feel right. It may never announce itself clearly. It may simply be an ordinary conversation that drifts close enough to the topic that continuing to hide starts to feel more exhausting than finally speaking. The discomfort beforehand is almost always worse than the conversation itself turns out to be. Because in the silence, imagination fills in every possible bad reaction, judgment, disappointment, conflict. But when the words are actually spoken, plainly and without drama, most people respond with far more understanding than the anticipation ever allowed for. Before we get to the practical steps, it's worth pausing to ask a more personal question. How do you actually know if you're carrying this kind of silence yourself? A few quiet signs tend to show up. One is a small flinch, almost too fast to notice, whenever a certain topic comes up in conversation. A subtle urge to change the subject before anyone gets too close to asking a direct question. Another is a specific kind of tiredness that seems to have no clear cause, a background tension that doesn't match anything happening on the surface of your life. A third is avoiding certain apps, certain envelopes, certain calls, not because you've forgotten about them, but because opening them means confronting a number you've been actively avoiding naming, even to yourself. None of these signs mean something is wrong with you. They simply mean you might be carrying a version of the exact silence this video has been describing. The same inherited habit, showing up in your own specific life, in your own specific way. Recognizing it isn't a failure, it's usually the very first step toward finally setting it down. Here's what's important to understand about these three stories. Rachel wasn't naturally more disciplined than Tom, and David wasn't naturally more fragile than either of them. They simply had different experiences with what happened when the silence finally broke, and those experiences shaped what came next, for better or for worse. If you saw a little of Tom or David in yourself, here's the good news. Breaking this silence doesn't require some dramatic announcement or perfect moment. It starts with something much smaller. One honest sentence spoken before the silence has a chance to close back in, chosen carefully with someone likely to respond with care. The first step is choosing a low-pressure moment, not a crisis. To say your number out loud for the first time, to a partner, a trusted friend, even just to yourself, written down plainly instead of avoided. The second step is asking questions instead of making confessions. How do you feel about where you are financially? Opens a conversation. A rehearsed apology closes one before it even starts. The third step is normalizing the discomfort instead of hiding it. You can simply say, "This feels a little uncomfortable to bring up, but I think it matters." Naming the awkwardness often dissolves some of its power. The fourth step is remembering that almost everyone carrying debt assumes they're uniquely behind. They're not. The people who eventually speak about it openly are usually met with relief, not judgment, because the person listening is often carrying their own version of the exact same silence. The fifth step, quieter than the others, is simply noticing when the vigilance starts to ease, the changed subjects happening less often, the flinch at a certain envelope softening slightly. That's not the debt disappearing. It's the weight of hiding it finally starting to lift, which is very often the heavier burden of the two. And the sixth step, worth naming honestly, is accepting that not everyone will respond well, the way David's family member didn't. That doesn't mean the attempt failed. It means that particular relationship wasn't the right place for that particular honesty, at least not yet. The goal was never universal disclosure. It's finding somewhere safe to finally put the number down, even if it takes more than one try to find that place. If this video helped you see your own relationship with debt a little differently, that's exactly why this channel exists. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the conversations still to come. Somewhere right now, someone is lying awake, running the same number through their mind for the 100th time, having never said it out loud to a single person. And somewhere else, a friend is wondering whether to finally ask, but deciding tonight isn't the right night either. These moments happen constantly, quietly, in lives that look from the outside completely fine. But here's what matters more than how this silence started. You're not required to carry it forward. The habit of staying quiet may have been passed down to you, but it doesn't have to be passed down any further. Think about Rachel, Tom, and David one more time. 3 similar starting points. 3 very different relationships with silence. The real difference between where they each ended up wasn't luck, and it wasn't natural strength. It was whether they found or kept looking for somewhere safe to finally say the number out loud. That search is available to you too, not someday when it feels easier, today in whatever small, imperfect way you can manage. Here at The Bigger Picture, we'll always explore the financial questions that truly matter, not with fear, not with sensational headlines, but with honest conversations, clear explanations, and the bigger picture behind every story.